Hello, viewers. We're going to do another channeled reading today. I have been sitting in this energy for about a week. One of my personal readings, again, that I was doing last Saturday, was suggested that I do a channeled reading with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I have done an Akashic reading with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in, I believe it was October of last year, one of my earlier readings using the Akashic deck, and felt his energy very strongly guiding me with the cards that I did. I have been feeling his energy around me quite a bit since then, and then when it was suggested that I channel him, I have felt his energy ever since. So, CJ, this one's for you. Thank you for the suggestion. Pardon me for saying so much when I am doing channeling. Sometimes it's my way of tuning into hearing, so I do tend to say more when I'm channeling. Just be aware of that. Bear with me. I wanted to go through just a little bit of history. I'm not, Dr. King's legacy is just immense. There's no way I can go through everything that he did, but thought I would just give a few highlights. He was born in Atlanta, January 15th, 1929. So this year, in January, he would have been 90 years old if he had not been assassinated. He was assassinated April 4th, 1968. So just a week ago, was the anniversary of his death. He was assassinated by a white man who had been in jail, who got out and bought a gun, who did this hate crime. Dr. King was a brilliant man. At the age of 15, he passed the entrance exam to attend Morehouse College. He graduated at the age of 19 with a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology. He went on to go to Crozer Theological Seminary. He married Coretta Scott King in Alabama in 1953. In 1954, at the age of 25, he became the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. In 1955, he got his PhD in systematic theology at Boston University. So he's quite a brilliant man, and as we all know, a brilliant orator. Probably, I have a dream speech, the best speech ever in history. So many people look at it and study it, and I love reading his speeches. I love finding old videos of him giving his speeches. In 1955, there was a 15-year-old girl, Claudette Colvin, in Montgomery, Alabama, who refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, which was illegal by the Jim Crow laws of the South at the time. They started to form activism then, wanting to do something, but felt like because it involved a minor that it wasn't the right time. Well, 9 months later, in December of 1955, Rosa Parks also refused to give up her seat, and King helped organize the Montgomery bus boycott. That boycott lasted 385 days. King's house was bombed. He was arrested, his first arrest of 29 arrests. The U.S., what came from the boycott, the Montgomery bus boycott, was the U.S. District Court ruled an ending of segregation on public buses. So that was the first real victory that they had in the civil rights movement. In 1957, he founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLU, which their motto was to save the soul of America. And the way they did that was through nonviolent protests. Although they worked together with other organizations in America, they were the leaders in nonviolent protests using the Gandhi approach. Um, in 1957, I believe also is when he had his first book, Stride Towards Freedom, came out. His second book, The Measure of Man, many, many other books that came out. 1963, interesting because you think of the Kennedys as having helped the civil rights movement. In 1963, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, under written direction from Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General under JFK, wiretapped King because Bobby Kennedy was supposedly was afraid of communists getting involved in the SCLC. That founded the COINTELPRO program, and that program later fell apart in the 1970s after many lawsuits, but they were going out and illegally wiretapping a lot of people and surveilling people. But what was interesting, he still went on to push for the right to vote, for desegregation, for labor rights and civil rights. We had the Civil Rights Act in 1964, was actually signed by President Johnson, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Even though Bobby Kennedy had pushed for this wiretapping to begin in 1963, which continued right up till King's death, they did help push through civil rights laws. One of the things that really stands out to me is Dr. King did not consider the KKK and white supremacists as the biggest stumbling block to civil rights, but the white moderates who were more devoted to order than justice, meaning those who were lackadaisical, for lack of a better word, for those who would not speak out on behalf of social justice. So that, of course, makes me want to ask him some questions, obviously, about white supremacists, but also about moderates who don't do enough. August of 1963, Dr. King led the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. JFK did work to ensure it was a success. He helped mobilize demonstrators from churches and the United Automobile Workers Union. They had 250,000 who attended, and that, of course, is where the I Have a Dream speech came from. One of my favorite quotes from, pardon me, because I am nowhere near the orator Dr. King was, but one of my favorite quotes from the speech: "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." In March of 1965 was Bloody Sunday, when they tried their first march from Selma to Montgomery to the capital of Alabama. It was aborted, and a court-order injunction ensued. They did a second attempt in March 9th of 1965. They got as far as the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and they're disbanded. March 25th of 1965 was their third attempt, and it was successful. Dr. King won the Nobel Peace Prize, of course, in 1964. And he went on, one of my favorite speeches. If you haven't read his Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence speech, I would highly advise Googling that and reading that, or looking for a video of him giving that speech. It was given in a church in New York City on April 4th, 1967. And just a couple of quotes from that speech. "A time comes when silence is betrayal, when silence is betrayal." And I think that's why he thought white moderates were probably going to be more of a stumbling block for civil rights than white nationalists and white supremacists. Another quote from that speech: "War is an enemy of the poor. And he said that because he felt it redirected funds from rehabilitating the poor, as well as the Vietnam War took a disproportionate number of poor black men into the war and killed them. So, fighting for racial and economic injustice through trying to end the war on Vietnam. He was criticized actually for that speech by many, but he couldn't, his seeing poor black men being taken advantage of in a disproportionate rate, as well as the war machine taking funds from rehabilitation of our poor areas of the country. He couldn't stop himself from speaking out against it. There's some other lines in that speech too. He very poignantly spoke about children in Vietnam selling sisters to our soldiers. So he was very aware of children and sex trafficking, in these areas where maybe there wasn't any other way to make money or whatever, but it was taking advantage of children and the poor again. So it's to me, he's one of the first people to speak about sex trafficking, children selling sisters to our soldiers. So that being said, I have my notes. I'm wearing my glasses because even though I have my contacts in, I'm more farsighted with my contacts in, so I have to have my reading glasses to keep up with my questions for Dr. King. And I'm just going to tune into his energy. As you know, when I channel, I do tend to shuffle the cards a lot because it's a way I'm pushing my filters out to channel more clearly, to hear him more clearly. I am not trance channeling, although I can trance channel. When I trance channel, I do not have the ability to see my questions. It's just straight on channeling. So I call this channeling light. I guess is the best way to put it. I will pull some cards that he guides me to, and I will hold those up for you, but I'm not going to angle the camera down. I think first I want to ask Dr. King about civil rights. How are we progressing? How are we progressing, and what can we do better? I'm just pulling his energy in closer to me. He's saying we can do more by celebrating what we have than by tearing down what we don't have. Than by tearing down what we don't have. We can celebrate our brotherhood. We can celebrate our human decency. We can celebrate our laws that are already in place and embracing those laws, enforcing those laws. In particular, the Voting Rights Acts to stop the voter suppression of minorities, not just of the blacks, but of minorities. He sees all the voter suppression going on today, and that is most discouraging because the voice of the people is not being heard. The voice is not being heard. Maintaining a status quo is not enough. It's time to push forward more. Equality for women, equality for children, equality for minorities, no longer making anyone feel inferior because of their race or their religion or their where they live, how they live. We have to begin at the beginning in educating people for them to understand where we're at today. Not enough education about civil rights, human rights is being studied in schools. The school books need to be rewritten. More time needs to be spent on the human condition, on the human condition. I know I have to step aside for a second. Excuse me, Dr. King. I know when I was in school in the 60s and 70s that, there was no studying of Dr. King and the civil rights movement. There was no studying really of the women's suffrage movement. It was like one little fact of, women got the right to vote on X date, and seeing a date for the Voter Rights Act, seeing a date for the Civil Rights Act, but really no discussion of it. It was just like bam, 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 and on to the next thing. Okay, and then all this. What did the white people do? It was like there was no studying of our Black culture, our Black history, our even Native American culture, our minority cultures. There was no studying of that. There was nothing really in the textbooks. And what I'm feeling from him is that hasn't changed a lot. We're still not talking about it. We're still not educating our children. Without studying this, the only point of reference that children have are what they hear from their parents. So what he's saying is, if you want to stop white supremacy, you have to educate children about things they're not hearing at home. So white supremacy continues because that's all they're hearing at home. And then they're not allowed to see any sort of different side to it. He's talking about when he was in Sunday school, how he challenged the Bible, in Sunday school. He said, I was kicked out. He was like a young man, and he was kicked out of his Sunday school class because he challenged something in the Bible. He didn't practice a fear-based love. He looked at God as a loving father, and we as the loving sons and daughters. And he challenged some of the rhetoric in the Bible and was actually kicked out of his Sunday school class. But he's equating that to children. He's talking about children learn fear, learn hate at home. And if they learn something a little different in school, it might counteract that. He had a boy friend as a young man that was a dear friend. He's talking about how special a friend he was, like a best friend, who was white. And when they started school, he was no longer allowed to play with him. So young children, I love, I'm getting a flash on some of the videos I've watched on YouTube of young children. They don't see skin color. They don't see differences. All they see is a friend. And if we quit messing with their minds, as parents, if they quit messing with their minds and repeating rhetoric, oh man, he's asking me to talk about some of Jimmy Kimmel's videos. Okay. He caught me watching those this week while I was sitting in his energy. Jimmy Kimmel does a lot of great videos where he interviews children. And one thing that really jumps out at me when I watch those videos, he was talking about what children thought of President Trump. And these children, you could tell, were just regurgitating what they heard at home. So children who were in families that supported Trump think he's the greatest president ever, even though these kids have no idea what policies he's doing or anything. When asked questions about different things, they have no clue. They just repeat the rhetoric they hear at home. And children who are from more liberal or Democrat families think he's horrible. But the children don't know why he's horrible when he pushes them. Like, why is he horrible? They don't know. They're just repeating what they hear at home. So that's what Dr. King's referring to. It's like children, they're the lighthouse of the future. They're the lighthouse of the future. So we have to be guarded. We have to be careful in what we speak to the children, and we have to learn to speak truth. We have to learn to speak in a way that allows them to grow and make up their own minds about things. Some of us do grow up hearing hate rhetoric. And he's saying, like you, I grew up in a household where racism was prevalent, and I never abided by that, even as a child. Even as a teenager, I had already sort of made up my own mind, went my own way. But I grew up in a household where I heard that a lot. Some people don't have the strength to make up their own mind. Some souls do not have the strength to make up their own mind. So they just keep repeating a pattern that they're hearing at home. Education is key. Education is key. Even though we attend to our children, we don't attend to our sovereignty, our country. We don't attend to more peaceful protests to speak out for inequalities and injustices that are done. He's quite pleased with some of the protests that have been going on for the last couple of years, the Me Too movement and some of those injustices. But we're not doing enough. Like, we could be getting out there and doing more and speaking out more as a collective and making our voices heard. I almost felt strangled for a minute. Pardon me, I'm going to take a sip of tea. The stifling of our voices, we're not getting out and speaking enough. On my list, I wanted to ask him about white nationalism, white nationalists, and will it be subsiding? And that's what he's reiterating too, that won't subside until we as a society make it important to put something else out there that we're teaching, and that includes in the classroom. He thinks education is very important. Yeah, undermining our youth will be the disruption of our government. If we do not do more for our youth, it will be the disruption of our government. Teaching and empowering our teachers. They're the role models more so. Children spend more time in classrooms than they do with their own parents. So a lot of the best role models, I mean, how many of us have a favorite teacher we remember? Teachers are our role models that these children look up to, and allowing them. A lot of the teachers are not allowed to open up their curriculums more. So we need to push as a society to have a change in our school books, to have a change in the curriculums. We need to push our boards of education and our society in general, push that forward. You just said racism is prejudice against humanity. So those, who are racist are against humanity because they don't feel like they're a part of a collective anymore. They don't understand that we're all one and the same, and racism is a prejudice against humanity. Talking about, even though we have to tell our children what to do, how to do it, like don't put your hand on the stove, you'll get burned, do this, do that, clean your room before you go out and play, those types of things. We don't encourage them to think for themselves. We put pressures on them. Society puts pressure on them. Their self-esteem is low because they don't know how to make decisions for themselves. So empowering children at a young age to learn to make some simple decisions for themselves. We don't even talk about bullying in our homes. It becomes an issue when your child comes home and they're the ones being bullied. Many parents aren't talking about it. Like, do you ever see bullying? Here's what bullying is. Do you ever see bullying going on in your school? Here's how you should handle it if you see another child being bullied. There's not enough conversation at home. There's not enough time spent with the parents. More could be done in the classrooms with that also. With the teachers speaking out, although it's not up to the teachers to teach our children everything. More could be done in the classrooms to talk about that, or in school, big school meetings. I'm flashing on like a big auditorium when you have the whole school together, starting with the principals of the school, talking about the bully policy, what bullying is, why it occurs, educating them why it occurs, not just what it looks like, why is it there to begin with? And asking the children, what does it feel like? What does it feel like to observe it or to experience it? What does it feel like? Children have feelings, and they're often very vocal about what it feels like. Dr. King feels very much to me like an empath. It feels like suffering, was what motivated him the most. That his inability to say no to a cause because he would feel how bad it felt and wanting to get out there and do something. He's talking about he wishes he had learned to say no a little bit. Yeah, he feels like he didn't spend enough time even with his own family. But at the same time, he said if more people had stepped forward, he wouldn't have had to keep going out there so much to be such a visible person, fighting for civil rights, to be the main leader. If other people had taken on more active roles in their communities, he would have been able to spend more time with his family. So it's the importance right down to a community level to, you don't have to travel to Washington, D.C. to march on Washington. You can get active right in your own community and do something. I want to talk to him a little bit more about his speech Beyond Vietnam, and taking advantage of the poor through the war machine, taking advantage of minorities, taking advantage of the impoverished. He's saying nonviolence is an act of aggression in and of itself, that you don't have to be aggressive, to sit calmly, to look someone right in the eye, calmly. Well, the energy of that is like startling. The militarization of America, the haves who make so much money off of the war machine, and the have-nots who end up having to go serve in like Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever, Vietnam in his day. It's utilizing the poor for them to make more money off the war machine. It causes us more enemies because we're going in places and not really fixing, we do it in the name of democracy and trying to help a country that's not ready to stand on their own. And it's, it just creates more havoc and makes more enemies. It's talking about the unrest in Venezuela and Guatemala and Central America. What we've done there to protect the moneyed interests. It's a machine for the elite. It's just a machine for the elite. And then we create all this unrest, and then the countries start falling apart, and then we don't allow the immigrants in. Let me ask him about immigration. Excuse me. Yeah, we created chaos in these countries. We created chaos in these countries, and then we don't let the people who are trying to flee the chaos that we created, we don't allow them into our country. It's a double-edged sword with karma. And so it's something that if we don't fix, I just heard the wall will dissolve, and I saw the wall, the wall at our borders. The wall will dissolve. If we truly wanted to help lower immigration, we would help these countries where we've created so much havoc to empower the people again and offer them opportunities again, and help support, if there are drug cartels and things, help support weeding out the drug cartels. Making it safe for people in their own countries again. And then they wouldn't have the need to want to come here as much. A softer border, a softer border. He's talking about there will always be a gathering of people who come to the U.S. for opportunity. There's always need. The stabilization of governments in other countries is crucial to slowing down some of those needs, because the needs will come more from environmental issues like the potato famine, that brought so many Irish to our country. If countries are allowed to form their own stable governments without us messing around in it so much, and creating more havoc. If we allow them a way of creating their own governments, we'll have less need of people wanting to come here or needing to come here, because they actually have their own national pride. They also, they have their own national identities they're proud of. But then when they're feeling endangered, then they want to escape somewhere else where they think it's safer. We'll continue to be a melting pot. We will continue to be a melting pot. He's talking about our education system that we offer, compared to other countries in the world. We offer some of the best education you can get, in colleges. And that will continue, that we'll continue to see immigrants coming over for education, then they end up staying. He'd like to see more done for education here in our country, for those that are not able to afford college. Fighting poverty through education and opportunity. He's talking about Chicago. I live outside of Chicago. He's talking about Chicago, the neighborhoods that have so much violence, that education can be crucial to helping to bring down the violence, starting with education and school systems, as well as, having more police efforts, until we turn the corner on that. A lot of this started, he wants me to talk about, I had a conversation with a dear friend the other night on the phone. He wants me to talk about that. I was talking about, the mafia started bringing drugs into areas in Chicago, New York, into black communities quite a bit, when they were no longer making their money in their usual ways of business, through a lot of union activities and strong arming businesses. When they were struggling for money, then they got into the narcotic trade. And the first place they went to sell drugs was on poor people and impoverished people and minority communities. Yeah, and then he's talking about, it repeats generations, because then you have families that are already dysfunctional, that are wrapped up in drug abuse, and then they're having children who are raised by people who are addicted to drugs, and then you add the gangs and the violence and the guns and everything else into it. It just snowballs. So it starts with creating safe spaces. After school programs. So many of the children that are latchkey children, or don't have somewhere safe to go. He's also talking about in the summertime when school is out, having programs. There's so many children who are not getting fed during the summer months. Having some programs where they can go and mentoring with people who are more stable. That those children will then look back at what's going on with their parents and say, no, I don't want that lifestyle. I'm going to do something different. Yeah, they'll find their own way through education to get out. This is he's getting into one of my other questions I had for him. There's been a lot of conversation about restitution for slavery, but I wanted to ask Dr. King about what he thinks would be the best restitution for slavery, because now we're several generations beyond it. but we still have an inequality with our black community. But then we also have an inequality with other minorities. In my opinion, we haven't done enough for Native Americans either, that we took land from. So I just want to ask Dr. King, talk to me about restitution. He's going back to 1777. He's like, we declared our independence. We started, down the road, and then we left the poor people behind immediately. We left the impoverished behind. We didn't take it far enough, in the beginning of our government. Although we had the creed of we the people are all created equal, we weren't treated that way. There was no, why did we have to pass laws, to abolish slavery? Why did we have to have laws for being treated equally when it was already stated in the Constitution? Because it began with our forefathers, because it began with their fathers who were already here, in the 1700s, setting up their plantations and farms, and the slave trade beginning. Greed again for profit, to turn a profit on your farm or your plantation, for profit. Whatever. He said, we still have slavery. We still have slave wages. Slavery still exists today because look at our minimum wage, all for profit for the haves. He just said, just because you're not beaten doesn't mean you're not a slave. There are many ways to beat someone, and you can beat them down spiritually, emotionally. So he's talking about restitution in general, raising a federal mandated minimum wage, looking at inflation through the years and where should the salary be. He's talking about in his one of his acts that he helped get passed through. They created a $2 minimum wage, which was the equivalent of $16 in today's money. And we've got states that won't even pass $10, $12, so we can't get the minimum wage up, so we're doing slave wages so that the CEOs and the owners of companies can continue to make billions in profit. So how is that going to go? So what else? Like changing our tax laws, obviously, raising our minimum wage. He's talking about, these billions of dollars that corporations make. A lot of times corporate America, they will offer their employees, they'll offer them, like if you go back to school, to get your master's or PhD or to get, your first college degree, if you haven't already, they help pay for the schooling. But he's talking about, they can help, if you're working full time and you have family at home, it's hard to go back to school. So what they can do to help those families who are struggling is at least help pay for their children's education, their children. So setting up funds for their children's education. The problem is that most people don't stay with the same company anymore as long as they used to. In the old days, you hired in, you might change jobs once or twice, but you tended to stay with a company for your whole life predominantly. Now, layoffs and all of that, people are changing jobs all the time. It could be done in a way where a fund is set up, like if you work X number of years for a company, if you stay loyal to that company for X number of years, they set up for your children a certain amount in a college fund. He would like to see more scholarships for the poor and minorities. He's quite happy with the minorities now that are coming out in our political seats, both at a state level as well as in our federal government, seeing more minorities represented. He's talking about that'll change on the Republican side in the future, that we'll start to see more minorities on the Republican side, but it'll be after the Republican Party has a major shakeup. Demographics are changing in the states where these people are running for re-election because we are a mobile society. So an area that before was predominantly white is now, much more mixed. And yeah, we will start to see a much more mixed level of service on the Republican side also. Mixed minorities in with those running on the Republican Party. Oh, I just, in my head, I went to Obama like, oh, wow, you must have like flipped out when Obama got elected. And he's like, whoa. Let's go there a minute. He's talking about Obama was satisfactory as a president. He's very like calm and level-headed. He's like, he was satisfactory as a president. He was hamstrung on a few things. He wanted to do more. He could have done more, but he was, his hands were tied. He's talking about morally for the country, what it represented, having our first black president, and how that lifted minorities up emotionally. Right down to a spiritual level, the amount of hope that it brought. He said it was palatable from heaven, from the other dimension, like, you just felt it. We felt it here, but they were watching from the other side. He's laughing. He said he doesn't sing so good. Dr. King liked to sing, apparently. He's talking about singing in church and things. He said Obama doesn't sing so good. So, but he's saying it like laughing, like almost like he's comparing the way he sings to the way Obama's saying. So it's almost like a little jab or something. Like he's just kidding. He loved the brotherhood on the mall during the inauguration of Obama. He's talking about how pleased he was to see white men and black men and white women and black women and other minorities represented there in the National Mall during his inauguration, standing shoulder to shoulder, waving their flags and cheering and crying, and the brotherhood of man. Oh, the devil card just fell out. Let's talk about Trump. He said Trump's not going to get his Nobel Prize, Peace Prize. He said, yeah, the fake nominations for him, laughable at best, pitiful, just pitiful. He just said he's doing okay for a white man with no moral compass. Yeah, he's talking about, I guess I have to figure out why America voted for him. He's going to the Justice Department first. He's talking about the Justice Department will fail under Barr. And he doesn't mean like it's going to collapse. He's like, it will fail under Barr. There will be several leaving. There will be several leaks. The Mueller report will come out. He said even if it has to come out in an illegal way, meaning it's leaked out, it will come out. He said Barr's trying to protect the Republican Party more so than Trump. Like, he doesn't really care about Trump. He cares about the Republican Party. So apparently that's his operating motives. He's talking about our judges, stacking the courts. That will continue to be a problem for minorities, not just for Trump trying to protect himself from charges or whatever. He's talking about that will continue to be a problem for minorities, which will affect our prison system. Talk to me about being a black man today, a young black man driving down the street and being pursued by police for no reason. That is encouraged by society. He's talking about a white woman walks down the street, she sees a black man, she gets afraid, she calls the police, and next thing you know, there's 10 there. That's just a figurative example he's giving. People have to get over their fear. They have to get over their fear of people looking different, acting different, whether it's someone who has a infirmary or whether it's someone who's a different skin color, a different race, a different religion, Walking down the street and you see a Muslim man or a Muslim woman, wearing the scarf, to not be afraid and make friends with these people. That's the only way that you get over the fears. Holding hands in brotherhood. He's going back to the I Have a Dream speech, where he refers to white boys and girls sitting at a table with black boys and girls and holding hands, being friends, not being afraid of someone because they're different, because they're, maybe they have a physical infirmity, maybe they have mental challenges, maybe they have a different skin tone, a different religion. He'd like to see more community centers where people are interacting from all different races and religions. People actively getting involved in their communities. I want to go back for a second to voter suppression issues. He kind of touched on it a minute ago, I think. Talk to me about voter suppression, especially in Georgia where you were born. Talk to me about voter suppression in general. He's saying the rule of law will always hold up in court. The problem is that oftentimes communities or people don't have the money to pursue it in court, but the rule of law will always hold up in court. He's talking about, he said, Chief Justice Ginsburg will make sure of that. So it feels like what I'm feeling is he's kind of showing me like something's going to bubble up in the court system and go actually to the Supreme Court level about voter suppression. And he's calling attention in particular to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Interesting. He said Stacey Abrams is not leaving. She's not going anywhere. She's going to be around in politics. We will see her helping Georgia straighten things out. He's laughing. He said, "Did you ever think there'd be a Democratic senator from Alabama?" Change is possible. As collectives change is possible. Yeah, as he's talking about, as our nation changes, as we have more and more minorities growing in population, and the white population will be dropping, as that happens more, as demographics change more, we'll start seeing less voter suppression issues. He said it's a shame that's what it's going to take to stop voter suppression. The actual change in the demographics in our country will actually impact voter suppression even more so than what happens in the courts. Let's see. I'm going to talk to Dr. King for a minute about gun control. Having been assassinated by a white man who got out of jail and went and bought a gun and then shot him. That's the short version of the story. By the way, there's a great documentary on James Earl Ray that was on PBS not too long ago that I watched, so watch for that. He's just shaking his head. White men and their guns. White men and their guns. He said we're going to start getting some wins at state levels, changing gun laws and gun, registration and applying for a gun. We're going to see some wins at a state level, and that will rise up and then push it at a federal level more. He sees a ban on assault rifles, but there's going to have to be some sort of buyback program or something that will need funding to get the ones out of people's homes that have them now. He said, for those who want to shoot assault rifles, join the military. You don't need those in your home. Your children don't need those. He's talking about the church shootings. He's saying, unfortunately, we're going to see more of those church shootings and temple shootings and targeting minorities and being done predominantly by white men. He said it's unfortunate that we haven't, or that our Congress has been unwilling to act on that, and the fact that most of the crimes in these mass shootings are being done by white men. He's talking about gun lobbyist reform. So whether that's NRA or any other gun lobbyists, there'll be a reform on that within 10 years. Within 10 years. Is that sad that it's going to take that much longer? How many more are going to die in that 10 years, right? He's talking about he loves America more deeply than ever from the other side. He's quite. It's not. It's not really patriotism. It's that he sees that we can elevate the rest of the world if we get our own issues straightened out here. That we'll still be able to show by example. He said the Republican Party's going to get completely overhauled, and we'll still have a two-party system. There may be a third party that comes along that starts to elevate He's talking about modern reforms that are coming. He's kind of going a little techie on me here. Modern engines changing, and I'm seeing like airplanes, like airplane jet engines changing. Um, they feel quieter and less pollution, and car engines changing. Um, he's showing me like a major change in engines in the next 20 years. Um, he's talking about also over the next 10 years a change in our government. Yeah, Hierophant here, he had me pull a commitment to the disillusioned in our country, to the impoverished and the disillusioned. Restoring balance after Trump, restoring balance after Trump, bringing in a new perspective, and it'll happen quickly. Um, we'll find our footing again, and the next president will take it further. Yeah, there's still going to be um, people who support Trump's agenda, um, but they're going to get shaken up because the Republican Party is going to have a major shakeup. Is going to have a major shakeup. They will end up having someone who is more fair and honest, rebuilding the Republican Party from within. He's laughing. He said, "You may even vote for a Republican sometime." I did once. That was the last time. Oh, I want to ask him if he had lived, would he have gotten into politics? Oh, he's shaking his head. No, 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 no. He said he felt he could do more um, for people who were hurting by staying outside but negotiating with the government. He felt he could do more. So if he had not, he said it was my time. He said it was my time. Being a martyr made him even bigger. Um, he said even though I wasn't a perfect man, I made mistakes. Being a martyr um made his voice bigger and what he spoke about bigger. So, but he's saying it even if he had not been killed, that he would not have gotten involved in politics. Um, but he said he would have voted for Obama. He said he would have voted for Obama. Yeah, he's talking about our changes with civil rights and with equality for everyone. That it's like we take 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, and 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. So it's like just barely moving it forward. He's like, get ready. There's going to be a big surge. There's going to be a bigger surge, where we'll actually finally leave our old ways behind. Leave our old ways behind. Um, it'll create more financial opportunities for people. Will allow more people to be successful. He's talking about the moderates of any race, any demographic. the middle income people need to get out more to the more impoverished people and talk to them about the importance of their vote, helping them get registered to vote, helping them get to the polling places to vote. That we all could do more with that. That, you know, it doesn't take long if you're going to the polls anyway, especially with early voting now. You know, with more early voting being allowed. If we're going to a polling place, take someone with us. You know, don't just drive alone. Take somebody, go pick somebody up that needs a ride. Take, you know, somebody who's sick and in bed. Take somebody, an absentee ballot or whatever they need. Help them fight. Help them fight for their vote, and help them with their sword of truth. Help them to understand the importance of their voice. He said so many are so disenfranchised that they just don't even care anymore because there's been so much voter suppression. So we have to constantly get out there, and let them know we have not forgotten them, that their vote does count. That's when we'll see big change. He said there are so many disenfranchised people who are not voting because they've just been beaten down and beaten down and beaten down. That's when we'll start to see a big shift in how the votes go, because there are so many that just don't even vote. Wow, he was talking. He keeps going 10 years out with me on things. He's talking about like mandatory vacations in 10 years. You know, I feel like our country is quite behind that. In my traveling the world for many years when I worked in corporate America, you know, we earn vacation time, but a lot of times, like, people don't even take their full vacation time because they feel pressure. Like, oh, if I'm not at work, you know, for a week, am I going to lose my job, you know, because something's going to blow up while I'm not there? There's so much pressure on us in America, and our work ethic, it's very strong, but it's also a fear-based thing. Like, we're worried what happens when we're not in the office. What happens when we're not on the job? Are they going to replace us? He's talking about there'll actually be laws of mandatory vacations. He's making a funny reference here. Hang on a second. He's showing me a Chinese fortune cookie and breaking it open and pulling the fortune out. And he's like, just because you get it on a piece of paper doesn't mean you get it in reality unless you get out there and work towards it, or put it out in the universe and let the universe bring it to you. So when you get that fortune, you have to believe it. So what you put out in the universe, you have to believe it in order for the universe to bring it back to you. I feel like he's very into metaphysics, talking about abundance and creating the life we want. Abundance, whether it's financial, whether it's a joyful home, a joyful family, whatever abundance means to each of us. He said, you know, you can break that fortune cookie open and read that little piece of paper, but if you don't believe it, it doesn't happen. And same thing with what we want to ask the universe for, that we have to be specific and believe it, and, you know, write it down, whatever, to keep putting it out into the universe. Yeah, I feel like I feel like he's actually very drawn to the metaphysics and like psychics and mediums and stuff like it, who communicate with the other side, and very in tune to people who know how to work with the universal energies and stuff. That he kind of admires that. I think, is there anything else you'd like to say today? He's like very abrupt. Nope, we have to go. It's like when he was alive, like that, like, oh, gotta do a speech here, gotta go. I want to thank Dr. Martin Luther King for coming in. He's like very quick, like, boom, let's go. So he's kind of already pulling back here. I want to thank Dr. King for coming in today. Yeah, his last words are bring the children to the forefront, make it about their future and what you can do to help their futures improve. He doesn't have too much to say on Trump. It's just something that he feels like it's going away. Don't worry about it. Things will return to normal and then improve. He's talking about he came back. No, normal wasn't so good. There are changes that need to happen. There are things that need to happen. So getting back to normal will be like, whew, we'll feel better for a little while, and then we got to start pushing the envelope again. Gun control, health insurance, minimum wage, whatever, all these things that we're trying to push our government to do, getting money out of politics, all those things. That's up to us to push and vote out the ones that don't do it. Yeah, I feel like he will be back sometime. So we'll wait. I have some other energies that have been hanging around me lately, but Dr. King wanted to come in first. I actually got my pendulum out last night, and with Dr. King, I was getting big yeses, like yes, yes, yes. With the other people, I was getting like not yet, not yet, not yet. So I want to thank Dr. King for coming in. If you enjoyed this, please click the like button and subscribe to see future videos. I do feel like there's going to be one other surprise channeled reading I may do later this week. I'm still kind of sitting in the energy to make sure the spirit on the other side wants to make it a go. But Dr. King, I certainly am very grateful to. Please go read his speech on Vietnam, Beyond Vietnam. It's a wonderful speech. There's some wonderful points made in that speech. It's one of my favorites of his. I think you guys would all enjoy reading that text. It's quite a long speech, but the points that are made in it are just tremendous. Anyway, thank you guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in another video. Bye.